Welcome everyone. As you know, this is the last panel of this very first intense and interesting day of the conference. So thank you again to the organization for this event. And we are here to talk about writer rooms, about pros and cons, about how is it working on a room, how scripts and credits are divided into a room, if we have or not a systematized hierarchy like they have in the American writer rooms, and if it's legally possible to have a writer room, because in some countries it's very difficult to have them. I know that some of the topics that we are going to cover have somehow emerged in previous panels because there's so much to talk about it, but that's why we have so many different voices from so many different countries, which I'm going to introduce. We have Marta Betoldi. She's from Argentina. She's a screenwriter, an international Emmy nominee. She has created a show called Ciegacitas, which has been adapted in different countries like China and Chile. And she has worked in the first Argentina Netflix original called Eda. We have Marie Roussin from France. She's a screenwriter. She has worked in many renowned shows in France, like Le Bleu and Village Français. She adapted the Spanish show Red Bracelets as well, and she has worked in international rooms. She has written in Borgia and Ransom. We have Vasant, Nath, whom you know from previous panel from Sacred Game, from India. He has written Sacred Games for Netflix. We have Teresa de Rosendo from Spain. She's a screenwriter. She has written feature films and up to 10 different TV shows in Spain. Now she's working on the first season of one Netflix show in Spain, and she also has written a book about writer rooms in both United States and Europe, interviewing writers from different countries. We have Jenny Lund from Denmark. She's a screenwriter as well. She studied at the UCLA University. Now she lives in Copenhagen, and she writes for several shows. She has been involved in the writing of Rita and Follow the Money and Mercure, among others. And we have Mohamed Motasem from Egypt. He's a screenwriter, and she has worked in Sony Pictures Television Arabia as development producer of international formats. So welcome everyone, thanks for being here. And as on the previous panels, I'd like to be a quite conversation, but I'm going to make a first question to each one of you to break the ice, and then we can start arguing. So Vasant, you transitioned from feature film writer into the most classic Netflix writer room. It was your first time and the first time of all the other members of the team. How was it facing this new working method?
So we all met each other for the first time when we got hired. And we knew of each other. There began a process where I think for a while everybody was extremely polite to each other and extremely careful with each other and on their best behavior. And I think that this happens when you start any venture together. But I think our decision to make the process very democratic was something that just led us into a lot of challenges because we just discovered how different we were as writers. Our politics, our styles, the tone of things that come out were just so worlds apart. And I think that because there have been no established writers' rooms in India before, you couldn't really choose. You just chose people who you thought that could get along as personalities and make the best of it. But we didn't know how to make the best of it. The first outlines we produced were like some kind of a Frankenstein with, the arm of one body and the leg of one body and the head of one body. And we all, I think, faced some depression after that came out. And it took us, I think, 8 months of trial and error and frustration and, literal personal problem with each other to reach a place where, remember, it's the first Netflix show in India. Everybody is looking at us and wanting us to succeed, which is also strange in a film industry. Everybody wants, I had never seen people so openly say that, yeah, come on, guys, you gotta succeed. So I think we all realize that we have to bury these differences, and we have to find a way. And there's so much I can talk about. I think I'll keep putting it in, but briefly, I mean, it was a...
Yes, you've mentioned one thing that's important, that's not arguing so much with your colleagues, and if that's difficult in your own country, when you work in an international room, and I'm asking you, Murray, it's even more difficult because you were in Ransom, which is a crazy international writer room with an American showrunner, Canadian French show.
Yeah, it was we're a bunch of writers from the US, from Canada, from Great Britain, and France. Well, I was the only French, and I felt very lonely because of my English, not because we were so different culturally. It has nothing to do with it, but it was hard for me to work 8 hours in a row in a foreign language.
You were writing in English as well?
Yes, but writing is not such a problem because I have time to think, and I have, time to choose my words and think about what I really want to express. Talking and reacting in a writer's room is a different thing. It was a challenge.
How did you deal with so different cultures? Because when you are writing with...
Between writers, I'd say it was very fine. What was more of a problem was getting notes from 3 different countries because they had different audience and they had different objectives and goals, and so that was very funny. Even the way notes were delivered. I know my American and British friends on Ransom was very, very shocked to get notes from the French network because it was very, very unpolite and rude, and I was laughing because I was so used to it. But like for them, it was absolutely shocking. They were really. I mean, it was something, and then we had to go over it and cope with it to address the notes and understand also the notes. So sometimes I could say, they're saying it this way, but it's okay. It's not so bad. It's not as bad as it sounds like.
We can talk more about this later, because one of the issues of writing in a room is adapting to another person's voice, because when we are here talking about writer rooms, we are talking about being as a part of a team, not as a showrunner, as they were discussing before. So it's difficult when you have to do it in your own language and culture, and when you have to adapt into 3 different countries giving you notes, so it makes even more crazy. And one of the positive aspects of having a writer room is that makes it easier to maintain the coherence and the same voice on your show, and that's something that we were talking about in last panel. And I'm asking you, Marta, because your show, Ciega Citas, had 120 episodes, and having a writer room is one powerful tool to maintain the same voice. And how did you organize the job there?
Yeah. I apologize for not speaking fluently English, so
I will translate.
No, I will read this paper, so it's better for you can understand me better, I suppose. I hope it. To be able to answer to this question, I say that in Argentina it's not usual to work in a writing room. I have done it only once when I worked for Netflix in EDA. But in the rest of the production, we, like Ciega Citas, as the head writer, I get together with some collaborator every day, and this other in a more sporadic day. But the coherence of the series is maintained only through me, because I act as a general coordinator.
So you were the head writer of the show?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I will explain briefly how most of head writer and I work in a daily series that go from 122 to 300 episodes. Daily series involves the writing of 5 episodes per week, of 50 minutes long each one. There is no time for the blank crisis, because it's the blank page crisis is impossible, because we haven't time to lose. It's a very demanding work in every possible aspect. The head writer, one or two, depending on the case, is in charge of meeting with the showrunner and the content director, and to create the series under their directives. The first episode is written. This implies to make a Bible, the scene, the character, the plots, the main plot. After the arcs of the plot, the first episode, 10 episodes the first, are done. The head writers writes the rest of the series alone. Later on, the authors in charge of the dialogues are added to the team, usually 2 or 3, depending on the length of the series. This provokes a team fracture, present from the beginning, in which we head writer feel alone and replenish in our tasks every time. After the show is launched, the head writer maintains close bond with the executive producer, director, actor to solve any daily problem on set. Every 50 days, I get together with the showrunner and the content director to discuss topics, best paths to be followed. We put together the plot for the rest of the episodes. Mm-hmm. After that, I work alone with the scientists and the specific content of each episode. I make the outline with some collaborator authors and then send it to the dialogues authors. After that, author in charge of the dialogues have 24 hours to send me the closed episode. And I correct the episode and send it to the producer. From the feedback that I get from the showrunner and the content director, etc., I correct the script in a final version. The day after that, we begin a new brainstorming. 5 days later, at most, a new feedback from production and content is received. That is the way we follow to make and deliver each episode.
So it's like having a factory of scripts, and that's why our writer room is useful. And we do have writer rooms in Spain, like they do in a quite similar way in the United States, and do have them in Denmark as well. And when we talk about writer rooms, we always talk about the similarities of those rooms and how, at least in Denmark and in Spain, both are inspired in the American ones. But it's interesting to talk about the differences, and especially about the flat power structure that we used to have, because we do not have this hierarchy like the showrunner, co-producer, head writer, and so on. We only have writers. And how is it in Denmark, Jenny?
I would say, as you said, we had this one guy back in the 90s who worked at the Danish broadcasting, Danish television. He went to the US, went to see how they did in the American writers' room. He came back, Svend Clausen, and said, let's do this in Denmark as well. So basically he changed the whole system and how we went from being very unprofessional in writing television series to actually trying to adapt the American way of writing. But as you also say, we still have to find a way to make it our own. For instance, we don't have huge writers' rooms with 12 people. I think the biggest writers' room I've been in was perhaps 6, and I think that's even a little bit big for Denmark. More maybe like 3-4 people. And then so the way it works is that we have, probably similar to what most of you guys do, but we have one, we don't call it a showrunner, but a head writer, who is mostly the person who came up with the idea and who maybe have written, before you even enter the writer's room, have written like a synopsis or storyline, some of the first season. And then you would bring in people to the room, a couple of writers, and then storyline the whole season, give out episodes to the episode writers, and they will write, come back, get notes, and so on. And I think what you said about the hierarchy is very interesting, especially in Scandinavia, where we are also happy and nice to each other, and nobody really likes conflict, and nobody really likes to be the one in charge. So I think sometimes that's creates some problems where between the episode writers and the main writer of who is actually who has the last word in the writers' room. So I think that's one of the challenges, or I don't know if it's specific for Denmark, but
yeah, I think it happens in Spain as well. So we are getting used to have this strong voice like the showrunner that we didn't had until recently. And Mohammed, in Egypt, writer rooms are quite a new thing, aren't they?
Yes.
And how did you face this new way of writing, and how was it before, and how are you adapting?
Well, I think writers' room started in around 2005. Egypt has a rich history of drama. It goes back to the 70s. But there was a big resistance to the idea because the Egyptian model is very similar to the European model of the author, of one person, one vision, one story that will come across to the audience. But then and it was basically funded by the government. There were no strict deadlines, there were no seasons to catch, but as it became a commercial business, and as there were advertising and now deadlines, and we want to make double or triple the number of episodes that we're making, it became harder and harder because, like, how many episodes can you write, and how much time if you're writing by yourself? And if you're making a movie, you have all the time in the world because movies take time. You can make a movie in 4 or 5 years and you're just thinking about the story. But for TV, you have to have an episode every week. You don't have this luxury of, well, I don't think it's right, I need 2 more weeks. It can't happen. So the idea of many people working together to solve the problem, the producers pushed for it. The writers in the beginning would have secret workshops, that they would have secret writers' rooms, and their names would not go on the credits. They would get paid, a fraction of the head writer would be. There isn't a lot of regulation. It's basically based on human interactions and negotiations. And then bit by bit, it became common, and it became like expected, like who are you gonna get, who's your crew? Who are you gonna get in your room? And this is the stage that we're in now, that it's gaining validation. It's not very regulated yet, but I think we're getting there bit by bit.
And this author thing, it happens in very countries in Europe, and we have found it writing the book with Teresa. And it makes it difficult somehow because it's not only keeping a voice with different writers, but involves a lot of rewriting when you don't have this strong voice that maintains the order and says, okay, this is where we have to go. It's very difficult to organize work, and we have found it in different countries. And Teresa, about the book and your investigation, what are the main problems that you would say? Because every country has his own problem with writer rooms besides the United States and Denmark and Spain maybe. And what would you say are the main problems that you found?
Yeah, one of the main problems all writers find all around the world, and well, all around the world now, in the US and in Europe, where we have been talking to writers, is that there is a disconnection between what the head writer expects to find in a script and what they find. And I think it is related precisely with the writer's room. I think one of the good things in the writer's room is there's a lot of communication and conversations. And if the head writer knows what he needs, he is constantly telling to the writers, yes, this is the serious, yes, this is not the serious. And if that's not happening, then the writers go home and write scripts that the showrunner is not happy with. And this is the thing about the writer's room. It needs to be a connection, and the head writer needs to say that is the serious. And if the writer's room is long, they were talking about before, that people who spend a lot of time in developing process. It's important because the team needs to become one voice. And that is one of the main problems everywhere. One of the things I like the most of the writer's room in the US is they have this figure inside the writer's room that is the writer's assistant, who is writing everything that is said in the room and shaping it and sending that document every day to all the writers so that they do know what is in the show, what isn't in the show, and why isn't in the show. So it's really important that communication, constant communication in the writer's room, and giving notes, which is another really, really important thing, because if a head writer rewrites a lot, and it's frustrating for the writer who finds a script where there's nothing left of what he wrote, but if he doesn't know why that is changed, he will make the same mistakes in the next script. So communication in the writer's room and in the notes is like the main problem all the writers find.
Yes, that saves a lot of rewriting, which is one of the main problems, I think, in France, the rewriting. When we were there, like talking with you and other writers, most of them complained about just what Teresa was saying, that they were in some kind of, not writer room, because there is quite difficult, but when they sent or delivered the scripts, the head writer sometimes had to rewrite a lot. How do you deal with that?
I don't know if you heard many complaints. I worked on a show where the screenwriter was the head of the writing team and the showrunner of the show. One of the few shows in France where we actually have a showrunner. And he used to rewrite a lot of the scripts he got. And he kept telling us that he was very happy with what we did. So I guess I got used to being rewritten and not feeling guilty about it. I never complained. I didn't feel like I didn't do my job, as long as he was telling me, okay, thank you, I loved a lot of things. And because for me, it was just serving him. So when I became head of a writing team, I rewrote a lot. And I was not happy all the time, but many times I rewrote, but still I thought it was very useful, and I really think the writer I hired was had totally his place on the table, around the table. So maybe it's because I got bad habits, and I think like, oh, I have to rewrite everything, but yeah, he's a great writer, and I'm happy to have hired him. I don't know, but like that's the way I see it. And when, I mean, the way I see it is when you're a writer on the team and it's not your show, it's not your vision, and there has to be one voice, and it's not yours. So I don't understand people who complain who has problem because they are serving another's vision. So I don't get it.
And about dividing the credit, when you write for another voice, and especially when you are in the room, maybe you are like 4 or 5 people developing one single episode, and then someone goes and write it. How do you divide the credit of that episode? How do you do it? Because it's written by not only by one person, but maybe the plot is written by 4 people and then the dialogue one. Jenny?
Yeah, so we would normally have, you get a storyline credit if you have been in the room and coming up with ideas. And then you get an episode credit if you're actually the one writing the episode. I don't think we don't use more than one writer on an episode, maybe sometimes 2 if they're not really hitting it. But I think, so then you split 50-50, the episode writer and the head writer, mostly. I'm looking at Christina because she knows all the numbers, but so you would get an episode credit, episode writer, then of course the head writer who has done the rewriting gets the head writer credit, and then when I say 50-50, that's with what do you call it, rights on the episode. But then if you have been in the storyline room, you would get maybe 10-15% or however much you have contributed. So
is it the same for every show in Denmark, or is something
no,
that...
it's very different from each show to each show how they divide it. But I think mostly it's about how much time you actually spend in the storyline room.
Okay, and this, Mohammed, you adapted Everybody Loves Raymond in Egypt, and which is a very American show with a very American writer rooms. Did you adapt the working method as well, not only the scripts, but the working method?
Not entirely. We were working on Sony Pictures, and Sony would have this idea of, they have these shows that they know that they work, and they can be adapted into different cultures, with modifications, of course. We did Everybody Loves Raymond, and we did Ugly Betty as well. And I think this was when we were really, like, this experience was similar to the person you're speaking about who went to the American Writers' Room and came back. This experience, but they came to us. You don't have to create a completely new episode, because you have an outline of what happens in the episode. So you don't really have a writer's room. You have a very strong head writer or two doing all the creative, solving all the creative problems. Like, how will this happen? How will this not happen? If we take this out, how? And then they create a breakdown, scene-by-scene breakdown. And they send it to a staff writer, to an episodic writer. And the episodic writer writes the script, our own version of the story, and he sends it back to the head writer, who does rewrites, usually extensively. And then we'd send back to Sony in LA to give us notes. And this is when we, like, for the first time, get the idea, introduced to the idea of notes. Like, someone would say, oh, but you have to change this word from here to here in this. And I was like, why? And then you would understand, because, like, this is where the joke lands, and you don't want it to land early. You want it to land at the end of the sentence, so that because it's a sitcom. And then we started understanding what is a sitcom, because it's a very specific form, sitcoms. And when we first started out reading the American scripts, the first thing that came to it, this is not funny at all. And then it's not that you read it and you say, where is the joke? And then you watch the episode, and it's very funny. And there's a big difference between what is there is small tonations, there is how the line is thrown, and this is how we learned how to, like, properly write bare scripts that can be performed by actors who add a lot of layers to the dialogue, or add a lot of soul into the jokes. And it was a big learning curve, because we were so used on, like, basically we would go as far, like, this is how you would exactly say it, and it doesn't really work this way. You have to create space.
One thing about working in a room, we were talking about that, is that it's not only about writing, but especially about pitching, and pitching ideas and jokes, especially in a sitcom, to your partners, because if they laugh, it's funny, and if not, not. Yeah. And can you talk about, every one of you, a little bit about the dynamics into the room, because you have to convince your fellow writers sometimes to set a specific plot or something like that. How did you do it?
So I think that my one takeaway from a year with my two fellow writers is that you realize after a point of time what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that one real strength of my lead writer was that despite his wanting to be democratic and polite, I think that he realized that he has to be very honest, otherwise we're not going to move forward. And the effect that had on me sometime was that I got very intimidated, because he would come back with his truthful feedback on what I have written. And often it was I mean, it made a real dent on my confidence to start with, and it became a problem because if I don't have my confidence, I don't have my voice. So I said, how do I get around this? And what it would result in is that pitches would not come out. I would second guess my ideas. I think how we solve that is that the nice thing about this kind of engagement is it's a long-term engagement. So even if you have to keep trying, and if you keep trying long enough, you will hit the mark at some point in time. And I think that if your process is going to be successful, the moment you have hit a good mark and if your team reacts positively and that idea remains, that's like a small place to draw confidence from. So I think that over time, we realize that, okay, fine, eventually this idea is going to get through and it's going to hit a spot in the vision. And I think you learn how to rely on your strengths, how to rely on the strengths of your partners to cover for your weakness. And trust is a very, very big thing. So I could trust that an idea that I have come up with, my partner Smita would be able to tell in 5 seconds what repercussions it has on every episode. She was very, very quick. I used to get intimidated, but then I started using that. Then I also realized that my lead writer has the exact understanding of the tone that we need for this show. So I would come up with something 70% there, and that 30% I learned to really appreciate, because over time you realize that, okay, fine, if it's getting better, then stick with it, just keep going, So those are the ways in which we...
Yeah, I want to add to what Vasant was saying, is that there is so much emphasis on creating a space for creation. There is so much emphasis on creating a space for your ideas to come out, but from my experience, the workshops that I work as a head writer in, which is basically the role that makes you responsible for shaping the dynamics of the people in the room, how they talk, how they deal with each other, I try to create a safe space for critique, for destroying, because it is we cannot just oh yes, this is really not, no, we have to learn to this is really not working. This is really not what we're trying to do, and people have to be comfortable with this, and to be okay, fine. And you shouldn't take it in a sensitive way. It's not about you. So what I really try to focus on is creating a safe space for critique.
Yes, it seems to be a trend that there's two kinds of writer rooms. The one which is a safe space and you can say whatever you want, knowing that maybe it can be a bad idea. And the ones where there's so fear and you think a lot before saying anything, because some head writers think that it's a better way to get the best of the writers. And how was your experience in your different shows? For example, Jenny or Marie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I once was given a piece of advice that I think is really, really good and that I brought with me in everything, which is, when you go to a writer's room, be funny and be nice to be with, because then you get hired again. And I thought that was really nice, because I think actually I've been so lucky that I've only been in writers' rooms that have actually worked really well. But I think it's really essential that you bring together people and this doesn't mean that you have to agree on everything. I think you must have different opinions and different experience and so on, so that you can challenge each other and get the best possible story. But I think to me at least, it's very important that you are in an environment where people think it's nice, we have nice energy, because it's it's so tough to be in a writer's room, and nobody really wants to be there, because it's 8-10 hours of just sitting there and wanting to kill yourself. So if you sit with people who are not nice to be with or have a lousy energy, I think that's, to me at least, that's very important in creating a good creative environment.
There's another trick to that. It's money. It's getting paid to be in the room. And are you paid to be in the room? Because not in all countries people are. So Marie, for example, are you in France, when you go into writer rooms, are you paid for being there?
Not really. I mean, we are it all depends on the involvement that the showrunner or the head writer is asking. But you cannot have a writer's contract with the time and like an office and a job hours. Like it doesn't work like that in France. I think we can still have writer's room. It's just that it's part of the contract, of the writer's contract, but it's not officially.
So you don't get a weekly fee or a monthly fee to attend the room,
No.
the meetings, and all this development phase?
No.
And in Argentina, Marta?
Okay. It's very different because the daily series,
Well, you have to be.
the time to think, the time to think and write the chapter is very, very short. So we intend to do quickly all the time. We have a very good training, but the creative process is bad. I think that the dialogues is outside of the brainstorming and when finished your write, we as head writer make a lot of correction. So we work about 12 hours per day. It's a lot of time. So it's very different to make a series like Netflix, one chapter a month or one chapter per week. It's very different.
And in Spain,
you
Teresa?
understand me? Because,
I do.
yeah,
I do.
Thank you.
I
You speak like an Indian.
No. In
We don't have, we have two kinds of contracts. One of them can be like a monthly salary, but that includes writing the episode you need to write for that season. And the other kind of contract is you are hired and you have a price just for the script you will write. And it's like in France, the meetings are included in that contract. And sometimes we have this double payment that the US have, but it's an exception in Spain.
And how is it in India, in Denmark, and in Egypt? Do you get paid to be on the room during the month you are waiting there, writing there?
We have our contract for writing the series, and we use the room as per requirement. I mean, I think in a preliminary discussion we spoke about how, I mean, I've experienced rooms where you're spending your entire workday every day in the room, but on Sacred Games, we did that as per requirement. The times where we were breaking story together, I mean, the first 5 weeks we were very, very regular in our meeting, but then it got less and less frequent. We would go home and work a lot, and there would be email groups and so on, and then we would come back to meet on review. And I think that I personally feel that that's a healthier space where you can go to your comfort zone. And, sometimes as a writer, you need outside, after you've spent time in that environment where, it's a lot of energy going in just managing each other. Sometimes you just need to go back to your space and scream or pull your hair and then settle down and write again, and you need to do that in privacy, and, it's your right. But I must say that I think that in a writer's room, you all may have experienced that, each of you gets to know each other's vulnerabilities. You get to know what really frightens you. You get to know what really bothers each of you. And I think that because you have decided, at least we decided that, we must come at this from a place of respect, even if we are fighting with each other. I think you, on some level, also start taking care of each other. I think that when that happens, good stuff starts happening with the writing as well.
Let's say something. The reason I decided to write a book about writers' rooms, I've lived a lot of nightmares inside writers' rooms. But when a writer's room work, it's my favorite place in the world. I spent like wonderful times inside a writer's room. It's a very good place to think about human conflicts and to share experiences. And when you share creativity with someone else, and the story starts to grow up, it's like really exciting. So I love writers' rooms. I think it's a really good place to be. And if you are paid for being there, for me it's like, okay, let's do it forever.
And Jenny, you were about to say something.
Yes, we get paid.
Go on.
We get paid for being in
For
the
being in the room, like,
yes.
do you have like a monthly fee or besides the
More
pay?
like a weekly fee.
A weekly fee. So
Yeah.
your rooms are more or less like the same in the United States, or how do you? Or your?
I would say I don't know exactly how it is.
They usually have staff writers, and correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
but
wrong.
we don't
with
have as
weekly
many
fee.
people, but we have, maybe the head writer, 2-3 episode writers, and then you get paid for sitting in the room maybe 4 weeks at a time, storylining, then you go back out and you write. So just yes to getting paid for writing. And by the way, I also love being in the room. It's not like I just want to shoot myself all the time, but I just want to add that.
Okay, maybe we can open the mic for questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, yes, there.
Thanks, everyone, for sharing your experiences. I have a question for Vasant. Is that how you for Sacred Games, you say we were in the room and then we went home. Did you then divide the episodes? You all worked on your own episodes? And then because you said there's no head writer, how did you?
No, there was a head writer.
Oh, there was a head writer.
Amongst
okay,
us
sorry.
three, one was designated head writer, and we had a showrunner who was a director. So he was not writing, but he was there. He actually chose to be absent from the room for the first 3-4 months. Chose as in he was also shooting a film. But it was helpful. It was helpful for us to not have him there to just freewheel. And how we divided was the lead writer took the opening, the pilot and the finale. And then Smita and I chose, we had to write 3 episodes each. I think the logic was that both of us wanted some part to play in establishing, but also didn't want to miss out in the fun of the end. So, she took 2, 3, and 6. I took 4, 5, and 7. So we got best of both worlds. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Well, in part. And then was there any rewriting after that, or was it?
Rewriting?
Did the head writer rewrite
All
the
the
way? All the time. Okay.
Yeah, all the time.
That's what I was wondering.
So like I said, especially since I write even the dialogue in English, my episodes needed a proper dialogue pass from the lead writer. But both the lead writer and the showrunner would actually, after a point of time, I don't know if you've all experienced this. When you need to move on, I mean, everybody just dispensed with the whole notes idea and started just rewriting. I would get my episode back with changes made. But I think by the time it started happening, I was okay with it. My other writer, who was rewritten much more than me, ran into a lot of conflict with this. But it had actually reached a point where there was no way to proceed quickly but this. So I think that what the showrunner, one thing that he kept emphasizing was that we're all learning, but we have to finish this, right? So let's just figure out the best way to do it and keep learning. I think I kept latching onto that. We're learning, okay to make a mistake. If I've made a mistake, okay, guys, help me,
Mm-hmm. I think there's a question there.
I have maybe a kind of a strange question. When you talked, I always imagined what's your room. So in the meaning of room. So I'm somewhat involved with SAP design thinking projects, and they have this amazing working space where you have room, where you have place to be alone, you can be together or something like this. So and I would interested, what's your room where you work in and where it takes this place?
In Spain, rooms there are not amazing at all. Usually they are a basement without windows and with mold on walls and some producers screaming, and this is the good ones. And Teresa, in fact, has some horrifying stories about rooms in Spain, but this is about the room. The thing is, I think as well is the best job in the world to meet in a room with writers, because you all speak the same language. You can get into a room with people who like to write and to discuss and to create characters and arcs and plots and things like that. So during a week or a month, which it's great. And my room, the room I was in, the last one, we were like 4 writers. I was the head writer, and then we had this kind of writer's assistant, which was really helpful because we ran out of budget and we had to fire some writers. And the writer's assistant was able to write. So he ended writing 2 entire scripts, which was really good for him because he didn't expect to end up writing. So for him was really, really good. And we were like a very close and happy team. And yes?
Yeah, because there is not, again, because it's not norm to have a writer's room in Egypt, so people would use their own spaces. So I was working on a project with a scriptwriter once, and we were staying in a hotel room overlooking the Nile, which was lovely. And in another project, we were working from a small room from the writer's family in nowhere's land, like desert all the way. And my own room, the one that I got like a year ago, is in downtown Cairo, and it's this big building with big walls because I love space. I don't think you can write in cramped spaces. You have to write in big places. This is where ideas can bounce off the walls. So it changes a lot. There is no set place that this is what it looks like.
And in France, Marie, how do you do it?
On the show called French Town, we were meeting at the SACD, which is the French CMO, and where we have offices available for writers. We can book, we have many offices and we can book in advance. So we were there for 3 months to get the character arcs of each season. And I'd say the meeting was 3 hours long, and then we would keep talking, but at a restaurant and while having lunch, and sometimes even wine, and it was a very French writer's room.
So our producers, they have an office. They have like an office building, and they gave us their one room over there to work for a while. But when just before we started writing episodes, where the deadlines were really approaching, we took a decision to all of us go to Goa, and we parked ourselves in Goa for 12 days. The idea was to be away from families and children, and just to be with each other. And I think that that's the time where we became friends as writers. It was funny. My lead writer doesn't know how to swim, and I taught him how to swim during that trip. So that was one way. And another, like, it's amazing how after spending 8 months with each other, you suddenly have a point where you can discover each other as human beings. We were sitting on a table, and there was a conversation about why the world's a horrible place to have children. Okay, it was like there was this big debate going on whether children, no children, and everybody went off. I was left with my writer Smita, And I don't know, I just said, I'm a dad and I don't agree with anything that they say. And Smita said, Vasant, I'm pregnant. I don't know whether I should. And I said, what? And she said, I'm too scared to tell the showrunner. And I said, you must tell him. And, we went and we told, and he was very happy, and he felt bad for having that. So, I think sometimes getting away lets you, you share vulnerabilities that after a point it becomes absurd to hold back. You know so much about each other. And then after this, I must tell you that it was an absolute pleasure to be in that room. I left the room feeling so much stronger as a writer. And, now these two people, they're not as close to me as my other friends are. But, when I left, you guys, wow.
Are there any more questions? Oh, yes, at the end of the room.
Hello there. I actually also have quite a practical question because, when you're in the writer's room, there are a lot of ideas floating around and everything. And I was wondering, do you guys have like a best practice to structure the creative process? Does somebody take notes? Who takes the ideas down? How does it work best for you? Or what were your best experiences?
It was my experience that the best way to work in a writer's room is for the head writer to have done a lot of homework before getting into the room. Usually I structure arcs, I structure stories, I have an idea of what the writers will, what the characters will be like, and I take all of this and get into a room and say, let's destroy this, or let's keep it, or let's do whatever we want. But it's much better than starting with a blank page, because this is just like, what is it even?
I don't think I've ever tried starting with a blank page, but I think, to me, I've written a lot of comedy, but also crime and drama, and I think it's very different to which genre it is. Like, for instance, comedy, you need more, a higher percentage of ideas, just pitching ideas. Whereas with drama, you have a certain sense of the direction, and but I would say for both, at least in my experience, for both genres, I would have the same, like the head writer being the one actually writing on the whatever, it's a whiteboard or you use notes or whatever. So you have that one person in the room that gather all the ideas and say yes and no. And I think brilliant if you have money for an assistant who can take notes. I've had that once. That was really, really great. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it's not really common in Denmark that you have maybe young writers or aspiring writers in the room to do that sort of assistant work. So it's very much up to the head writer and then maybe the episode writer to take extra notes. But I think that the common brain somehow on the wall or in the space somehow, I think that's very one way or another common.
And I have a question. How detailed are the outlines and the scripts when you write it in the room? Because it depends on the team. Sometimes writers get these more open scripts and they can invent at home, and some of them get this very closed and really detailed scripts. How do you do it usually?
Well, I really prefer knowing as much as possible in the room, so that you send a writer home to know exactly what are the scenes and what is the outline, and then surprise me, do something that I didn't expect, try something if you feel for it. But I think the better equipped you are, the better you know the story when you go home, the better the script will be, and less rewrites, I think.
Are there any more questions? Oh, yes.
You are all in the rooms now where the times are changing. You talked about the safe environment of a room. How much safer have the rooms become, or how much more limited in freedom of speech since Me Too, because in America it used to be all end all and misogynistic and sexist. That was all fine. Now I think it changes for the better, hopefully, but that means you have to limit yourself in your thinking process. What is your experience over the past years, how that changed?
So someone must be able to answer better than I can, but I think in the US there is actually some kind of a law of some kind of an agreement that within the room you are absolutely free to say anything you want and make all the jokes you want, because otherwise it would be like terrible for comedy writers if they can just you know, like say that the first thing that crosses their mind, and sometimes it's very bad, very racist or sexist or like very really terrible, but they have to be able to do it. So I'm pretty sure, I mean, is any American writer can confirm it, but I think there's a kind of an agreement. And when I was working with the American and Canadian writers, that's one of the someone asked the question one day. I think it was a Canadian writer, and when she arrived, she said like, "Are we okay to say anything we want here? Like, are we all like, do we all agree that?" And it really mattered to her to know that she was able to say anything she wanted. So, I don't know if I answered your question.
So I think we have to go. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here.